For a brief moment in the early 1990s, Sacramento ruled the football world, from almost bringing the Los Angeles Raiders to town to eventually becoming champions of the American football playing world. It was a fleeting, glorious moment for the city. If the Dallas Cowboys are America's team, then I guess that made Sacramento and the Surge the world's team for those 3 years between 1990 and 1992. Those that lived it wouldn't trade the memories for the world. The history of the Sacramento Surge is equal parts chaos and charm. They didn't simply win a national title in a national sports league. Their championship was international, spanning all longitudes and latitudes. This is when Sacramento ruled the football world.
K. Stevenson, the Sacramento Surge, rules the world.
We start in 1990. It is an interesting time in the history of Sacramento.
Obviously, we have the wrong tape queued up there.
A relatively unknown band called Nirvana plays a show at the Cattle Club. Gunther's celebrates its 50th year in town hawking ice cream scoops. And everyone is still really salty about Al Davis not bringing the Raiders and the National Football League to the River City, despite the fact the Sacramento City Council had unanimously approved a $50 million franchise fee, is basically free money for him, as well as a promise to build a brand new football stadium, Arco Park. Vagabond Al Davis may not be showing up, but locals were still exceptionally eager to land an NFL franchise. In fact, those in town were plotting and scheming behind the scenes on how they could potentially land an expansion franchise. After Davis backed out of his handshake deal with Kings owner Greg Lukenbill and city officials, there was a little known attempt by those in the city to try and buy the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Nothing obviously happened, but people went with a cashier's check down to Florida to try to lure them to Sacktown. Sacramento had itself a case of football fever, and it was bad, yet no one was particularly interested in an NFL alternative, especially given how recent the USFL's flameout was in the minds of the public at this time. Despite that sentiment, a non-NFL franchise just sort of arrived. Those running the World League of American Football wanted a team in California. Like, they really wanted a team in California. Essentially, every city in the state that started with the letter S outside of San Francisco was sounded out about a potential WLAF franchise. San Jose, San Bernardino, and Sacramento were all touted as finalists for WLAF franchises in 1990, although none were actively campaigning for one. It was rumored the league's backup choices were Salinas, Susanville, and Shingle Springs. Okay, so I made that last bit up, but it does sound like it could potentially be true. I've always got the sneaking suspicion here that the NFL's plan was to pitch potential owners in Europe by showing them David Lee Roth's California Girls music video. Hey, random German millionaire, buy a team in our new football league and you can be one of these quasi-racist stereotypes gawking at women in California. Sadly, San Jose, San Bernardino, and Sacramento aren't quite Venice Beach. It would be the capital that was awarded an expansion WLAF franchise, and that news was greeted by yawning indifference from just about everyone in the city. Kings owner Greg Lukenbill, who was fronting this endeavor alongside Fred Anderson, basically spent the entire time talking about how this wasn't going to be minor league football. This was a real team and a real league. And to some extent it was, but it wasn't. The NFL operated the WLAF, and pro teams had the ability to loan players to their global cousins, second cousins. The relationship between the two wasn't ever really fleshed out, and if we're being honest, there wasn't a huge connection between the WLAF and NFL. AAA and MLB, this was not. Honestly though, Lukenbill and Anderson could have cared less about what league the team was playing, and their entire goal for this experiment was to keep the dream of that Arco Park football stadium alive. Either the Raiders would reverse course and want to come back to Sac, or they could land an expansion NFL franchise in 1993. A World League of American Football team kept that project alive. Neither Arco Park or an NFL team would find their way to Sacramento, and if we're being quite honest, the WLAF barely made it. With 5 months before the 1991 season slated to kick off, none of the teams had paid their expansion fees, and several ownership groups, including Sacramento's, still weren't all of that sure on the whole thing. Apparently, someone had a conversation with Anderson as all of this was going down, because he changes his tune rather remarkably in a short time span. In the same month he claimed to be cooling on the entire project, he then stumps up the cash for the franchise and calls the WLAF credible. Around the same time, the owner is asked what this new football team would potentially be named, and he utters this absolutely preposterous statement. "I want a name that ties in with Sacramento history. My first thought was 49ers, but I guess that's taken." You guess that name is taken? You guessed the name of the team right down the road from you in San Francisco, and who has spent the entire 1980s winning Super Bowl after Super Bowl, has taken the name of what you want this proposed franchise to be. Also, how is that your first thought on a potential name for your football team? The situation gets even more comical because Anderson just picks a bunch of team names, all of which were copyrighted. Those running the WLAF, desperate to get this process over and done with because the league is kicking off in 4 months and tired of Anderson's totally uncreative team name suggestions, gives the Sacramento's front office a list of names they can choose from. So if you're ever wondering why Sacramento was called the Surge, there you go. No meaning, no story behind it. It was literally just a team name on a list that was picked. And as for the moniker itself, it may have grown on people over time and is fondly remembered today, but at the time, well, it went over like a fart in church. I once played on a Foothill Farms youth soccer club called the Escargot, so names can always be worse. It's a sliding scale. Next up for the Surge was hiring someone to lead this franchise on the field. That would lead to maybe even a more curious decision. Case Stevenson was tabbed to be the team's head coach. He had been selling real estate in Pensacola, Florida for several years after flaming out of the NFL. His doomed stint in charge of the Buffalo Bills saw him go 8-8, 2-14, and then 0-4 before being fired in 1985. In fact, his only real claim to fame as head coach of the Buffalo Bills was changing the team's helmets from white to red. The fact he'd been out of football for almost 5 years at this point tells you all you need to know about Stevenson's status in the world of football. There were other notable names on the staff as well. Sacramento's special teams coordinator would be Jim Haslett, who of course goes on to become New Orleans Saints head coach. Former Iowa State head coach Jim Kreiner was also on the Surge staff. He'd been fired in 1986 for having the audacity to feed recruits and drive them around Ames. The franchise also signed Ronnie Lott as color commentator for radio broadcasts on a pre-KHTK 1140 AM. Oh yeah, it's February, the league kicks off in about a month, and no team has any players. Rosters have not been formed. Everyone's heading down to Orlando, Florida for this big 3-week training camp smosh. There's going to be a draft, there's going to be other events. The league, realizing they are very much in a time crunch, opts to delay the start of the season by about 2 weeks or so. It was a wise move. It wasn't all weird or confusing things happening, no. The Sacramento Surge, a few months before the season kicks off, despite having a team with no players on it, has sold around 5,000 season tickets at Hughes Stadium for the upcoming campaign. The WLAF draft happens in mid-February, and Sacramento doesn't really take anyone of note. I mean, they somehow end up with multiple fullbacks, multiple kickers, and the guys they did take at skill positions you've likely never heard of. It's just a lot of bodies they hope can be turned into something. Oh yeah, also happening in the world of football as the WLAF draft is taking place, the San Francisco 49ers are busy doing this. I told you it could always be worse. Anyway, the WLAF draft wasn't even the main event for player allocation. A week later, a super secretive supplemental draft, or drafts, not even the league could keep their story straight on that one, would be held by phone with all of the teams involved. That is when the Coaches 50 would be available for selection. What was the Coaches 50? Well, each coaching staff nominated 5 players they simply wanted to see in the league. I know this sounds outlandish and absurd, but there was a little bit of logic to it. It's not as crazy. They weren't just selecting, hey, Ronnie Lott, you want to come play in our league and not just be a color commentator? WLAF front offices were putting out a lot of feelers to NFL teams on what players they could potentially make available to play in the upcoming season. In the world of soccer, this is obviously what's known as a loan anyway. Perhaps the most notable player who was going to be a part of this, at least that's what the rumor and innuendo was going to be Steve Bono, the San Francisco 49ers third string quarterback. It had been suggested that the team was happy to make him available as part of this coach's 50 list after the Surge, who held the first pick in that supplemental draft, reach out to their Bay Area counterparts. That never materializes. Bono is not in the WLAF in 1991, although some NFL teams do make their players available for selection. The Surge received Kansas City Chiefs third string passer Mike Elkins, who was the only NFL quarterback to be signed to play in the league. He was promptly made the team's backup behind Ben Bennett, who had a solid college career at Duke, bounced around the pros for a while, but was primarily an Arena Football League quarterback by this stage of the game. In fact, he was Arena League MVP in 1988. Bennett would not hold on to the starting role for very long. And really, when you just go over who the Sacramento Surge had heading into the first game of the season, it was not a good roster, really, outside of Carl Parker. Quite frankly, most of this lineup were guys on their way out of professional football altogether. Not that anyone knew or even cared that much at the time. Season tickets for the Surge inaugural campaign at Hughes Stadium were going faster than anyone had expected. In fact, things were so good, the team overbooked seats between the 20-yard lines. It took the team quite a while to figure everything out, and their solution was, well, screw it, we're just going to give people worse seats. So a lot of season ticket holders who thought they were getting a premium seat between the 20s found themselves closer to the end zone than the 50-yard line. When the team did get back from Orlando and assembled for a Sacramento training camp, it wouldn't actually be in Sacramento. Instead, it was going to be organized at Anderson's house and big-ass farm in the sticks. We're talking Rancho Murrieta. That is the country. I mean, that is way out there. So not only would the team be practicing on Anderson's farm, but there was a nearby operating engineers training school that had dorms and stuff like that, so the teams would have the basics, although the players could stay out in Rancho Murrieta. There would end up being a hitch with this setup. The newly created football fields on Anderson's farm couldn't withstand the torrential downpours and heavy rains the Central Valley was experiencing at the time. Several days early on in training camp, the team had to lug some 90 miles to Diablo Valley College in the East Bay because they had a turf field available. Seriously, there were days when the team would have to travel 3 hours in total just to practice, for the simple fact Anderson just wanted to have training camp on his sod farm in Rancho Murrieta and not rent out facilities somewhere in the greater Sacramento area. Despite some of these hiccups, Sacramento was genuinely excited for this football team of players no one had really heard of participating in a league that no one knew anything about. Before the first game, 800 plus people attended a Sacramento Surge kickoff breakfast event at the Red Lion Inn where tickets went for $15 a pop. Good crowds would turn up for other meet and greet events with the Surge in the build-up to the team's kickoff on March 23rd. Surge officials were also extremely mindful of the impact the Kings home game on that very Saturday would have. To alleviate potential issues caused by that, they arranged a shuttle bus that would allow fans to park at Arco and take a shuttle to and from the Surge game.
Here in Sacramento. With the ball, Lionel Simmons. Simmons pushes it up, got another one.
Not everything the team did was thought out as well. For instance, this Surgeon General's marketing campaign is so stupid. Why are you introducing a medical theme into this? Here's the deal. No one really ever knew what the Surge name was supposed to be. Was it like an electricity thing? Was it like a storm surge? No one ever bothered to think things out on that front. The whole extreme with a capital X and Surge Soda are still years away. Meanwhile, the Orlando Thunder also had a lightning bolt in their logo, which made it a bit difficult to tap fully into the electricity thing, I suppose. Without any clear brand identity in place or just even a vague idea of what Surge was supposed to mean, you ended up with weird stuff like this Surgeon General's thing, where you have players warning you about the health risks of not supporting local football. Also, the two guys in this picture are your starting and backup quarterbacks. Maybe you want to introduce another position group into the mix? That questionable marketing aside, 16,000 tickets were sold ahead of the first Sacramento Surge game ever. However, storm clouds had developed around the team and were now lingering over that opening contest. Not in a figurative sense, mind you. We're talking literally here. Rain throughout the week and forecasted precipitation on game day dampened expectations for that very first WLAF game in Sacramento. When the Sacramento Surge kicked off for the very first time in team history on March 23rd, 1999, down at Hughes Stadium, there was only one certainty: the weather. It was going to be, as we here in NorCal are fond of saying, hella wet. Another rainy day in what had been a rainy spring for the capital. Everything else was anyone's guess. It was a bunch of unknown or unsuccessful football players who had been gathered for less than a month at this point in time. And the hometown Surge would be facing off against the Raleigh-Durham Skyhawks, who were basically in the exact same boat as they were. 15,126 brave Sacramentans showed up to watch history made, with the announced attendance actually being less than the numbers sold. The weather kept a fair few people away on this day. Those who did pass through the turnstiles probably felt as if they were watching a game from Waterworld's famed Breaker Beach and not so much a stadium. Apparently, no one in the World League of American Football offices believed it was possible for rain to happen in Sacramento in March. Both teams are using these extraordinarily plain tan raincoats that may or may not have been purchased from the Arden Mall wine stocks the morning of the game. That hypothetical shopping excursion would have produced far more action than anything the two teams managed to produce at Hughes Stadium. The Skyhawks kicked a field goal to go up 3-0. The Surge do nothing of note during the first three quarters. Their signal caller, Ben Bennett, put together a fairly underwhelming stat line of 6 for 17 with 43 yards. Head coach Kay Stevenson does make a switch as the fourth quarter begins, swapping out Bennett for Kansas City Chiefs loanee Mike Elkins. He leads the team on a scoring drive. Sacramento misses the extra point, but they would kick a field goal later on in the contest, and that's your final score. The Sacramento Surge win their very first game by a rousing total of 9-3. 93 Rock this was not. Fans were happy, but the win was butt ugly. It also created a controversy under center for the Surge as to who would start their next game. It would be a short-lived controversy, mind you. Stevenson would give the nod to Elkins, who had gone 7-10 in relief of Bennett. Also for reasons, famed defensive back and Raider Lester Hayes, whose only connection to the Sacramento Surge was playing under that team's defensive coordinator Charlie Sumner, announced they would win the championship while using the word stupendous on multiple occasions. Look, nothing against the word stupendous, but you should only really use it once during any given conversation to describe something. That's it. That's the rule. Next up for the Surge was a trip to Birmingham for a showdown with the equally offensively challenged Fire, and the two sides played a very dour contest. I mean, okay, on the bright side, each team did score a touchdown. There was that, but it was in between a bunch of turnovers and poor throws. Honestly, the biggest highlight of this entire game might have been when someone on the Fire's coaching staff gave their kicker a really unnecessarily aggressive butt slap after a kickoff. Guy, it is 3-0 with 10 minutes left in the second quarter after what was an extraordinarily routine kickoff. If you really need to perform an ass lap, take the intensity down a couple of levels and recognize the reality of the situation. When butts weren't being spanked, the Surge actually had a chance to tie this game late in the fourth quarter. First and goal to go on Birmingham's 2-yard line, and the Surge managed to do this. Drop pass, comical underthrow, drop again, open wide receiver slips in the end zone. With the team sitting at 1-1, the Surge would once again go on the road the following week for a contest in San Antonio against the Raiders. However, a tragedy back at home would really overshadow this game and linger over the city for a few weeks. On April 4th, 1999, the Good Guys hostage crisis, in which 40 people were held in gunpoint, 3 were killed, and 11 more wounded, rattled the city. A 10 a.m. local kickoff for a game and a start of startup football league that was still trying to find its footing was the least of anyone's concerns at this point in time. It was probably for the best no one was focused on the Surge because they turned the ball over 3 times in a loss to the Riders, who were starting their 3rd different quarterback in 3 games. And this third passer, by the way, had only been practicing with the Riders for a few days in the build-up to this contest. Elkins was benched and Bennett was given another chance to lead the team to a comeback victory. The latter would guide the team to a grand total of 0 total yards. There is no comeback Surge lose. Offensively, Sacramento is awful. They've scored 22 points in 3 games. With the side's second home game coming up, Stephenson refuses to name a starting quarterback early on in the week, but the situation quickly resolves itself. Ben Bennett was cut by the team and Elkins anointed the starter by default. The team prepares to welcome the Frankfurt Galaxy in what is being billed as the first international professional football game ever played in Sacramento, whatever that is supposed to mean. The team went all out to make their German guests feel right at home. At least if that feeling involves nothing but a bunch of German stereotypes. The Galaxy, for their part, have a few notable names. Their head coach is one Jack Elway, dad of John, and a former Stanford and San Jose State head coach in his own right. It was another pretty horrible game to watch, but if you're gonna be ugly, at least win ugly, and the Surge managed to do that against their German visitors. In fact, this would be the first time an American WLAF franchise beat one of their European counterparts. The 16-10 scoreline in favor in Sacramento, though, doesn't really tell the entire story of this game. The Surge were outgained by the Galaxy, 332 to 214. Only one of the touchdowns Sacramento scores is an offensive one. Elkins goes 11 for 25 on the day. But hey, the Surge are back to 500, 2-2. Not only that, but they sit atop the North American West Division standings of the WLAF. They have a bye week, and then after that bye week is a Monday night primetime matchup against the 1-3 New York, New Jersey Knights in the Meadowlands. There is good news and there is bad news. The good news is that the Surge managed to score more than 1 offensive touchdown in a game. Huzzah. The bad, they lost to a Mouse Davis coach Knights side 28-20. Sacramento sits at 2-3 at the midway point of the 10-game season. They do get their next 2 fixtures at home though, facing off against the Barcelona Dragons and Montreal Machine. The side also added a reinforcement at the quarterback position as the WLAF once again organized another draft, giving every team in the league an extra passer. Speaking of signal callers, Barcelona would be starting famed Notre Dame quarterback Tony Rice after their starter, Scott Ernie, was injured. This would be Rice's first start since the 1990 Orange Bowl, and he was kind of a big name. Obviously not a great thrower of the ball, but his running exploits were famous. And it was one of the few big quote-unquote names the WLAF had. Man, this was one weird-ass game though. I mean, just look at this final score. Barcelona 29, Sacramento 20 in overtime? How does such a thing even happen? Well, the answer here is that the WLAF had some, shall we say, interesting overtime rules. Both teams get a possession, so it's not sudden death, and in order to win, a team had to lead by at least 6 points or lead at the end of the overtime session. Barcelona kick a field goal to take a 3-point lead in overtime, and then Mike Elkins throws a pick 6, meaning the Dragons would go home with a 9-point overtime victory, a true rarity. In theory, this is possible in the NFL with the current overtime rule stating a field goal no longer ends the game. In college, I suppose you could win by as many as 14 points if you got the ball first, scored, got the 2-point conversion, and then got a pick 6, but it's still a really weird, odd way of formatting it with the you have to win by 6 points rule. More peculiar than the WLAF's overtime rules had to have been just how the Surge managed to get to that point. Not only do the Surge erase a 20-point fourth quarter deficit, but Elkins throws an interception inside the Dragons' 20-yard line with only a few minutes left in the game. Then with the scores still tied, Sacramento blocks a Barcelona field goal despite clearly committing a neutral zone infraction. Not a great result. On the plus side, more than 19,000 people packed Hughes Stadium for this clash against Barcelona. Yet the large crowds brought to light a pretty large issue for owner Fred Anderson. Not only did the parking situation suck around Hughes Stadium and would suck really until they finally built that parking garage in the 2000s, but the team was losing money because running the venue was just a money pit. There wasn't money to be made on parking or concessions for the team. This, by the way, not a new development. Every professional sports franchise that tried to run at Hughes Stadium ended up losing a lot of money, and that included the AAA Solons in the 1970s. At the end of the day, they all ended up giving up. Stadium issues, though, were a topic for another day. Back in the WLAF, the Surge had a home date with the Montreal Machine, but now had to deal with a sputtering defense. Looking to shake things up, kicker Kendall Traynor was cut and replaced by John Nyes, who had a punt block and missed a 26-yard field goal against Montreal. As bad as that was, there's a much weirder sequence to happen during the Surge Machine clash that I have to bring up because I've never quite seen anything just like this. Elkins throws one of the worst interceptions you've ever seen, and then the defensive tackle who catches the pick proceeds to Ole the quarterback on his way to scoring a touchdown. But the touchdown wouldn't count. There was a defensive penalty, so it's wiped off the board. Then same drive, a few plays later after the pick that wasn't, Elkins pulls off this magician routine where he somehow inexplicably avoids a sack. After all that impressive scrambling, he then heaves a magnificent touchdown pass to a wide open receiver, only for it to be called back for offensive holding. As for the result, the Surge fall again in overtime. They're now 2-5. Something is just not clicking with this team. Sacramento isn't getting blown out, but they just cannot stop with the self-inflicted wounds at exactly the wrong time. A costly turnover, a missed kick, a blown coverage, something happens that is preventing the team from winning. Every loss the Surge had up until this point in the 1991 season was by a single score. Somehow though, despite the less than impressive 2-5 record, there are still stakes for Sacramento to be playing for. They're only a game back in the North American West Division standings, and a trip to Orlando to take on the Thunder, losers of 5 straight themselves, provided a chance to not only get back in the winning column, but keep those playoff hopes alive. Instead, Sacramento produces its worst performance of the season. Mike Elkins was throwing to defensive tackles again, punts were blocked, the defense is a shambles. It is a horrible performance all the way around. But get this, somehow the Surge still alive for a playoff spot because the North American West Division is just junk. No one is winning games. Sacramento still a game out from the division crown, and with it, an opportunity to play in the postseason. All they needed to do to keep those dreams alive was win their final home game of the year against the London Monarchs, the undefeated London Monarchs. The Surge marketing department used the tagline, "Kick the crown off the Monarchs." I mean, given their own team's kicking woes throughout the entire year, maybe that wasn't the best way to get people to come to the game. Interestingly, the same week London's American football team visited Sacramento, the Queen herself was in Baltimore to take in an Orioles-A's clash. Imagine the Queen of England not only in Sacramento, California of all places, but Hughes Stadium to watch an English team play an American football game. The thing is, she couldn't have attended even if she wanted to go. The final home game for the Surge was sold out, the first sellout in WLAF history. The Queen may not have been in the crowd, but Surge owner Fred Anderson invited Al freaking Davis to come watch this game in person. This is the equivalent of Michael Scott hiring Ryan as a temp again after he'd been fired for fraud while at corporate.
Give me Ryan Howard. Give him to me. I want him. I need him.
Davis straight up cost the city of Sacramento millions of dollars, stringing everyone in town along only to bail on the agreement that would have brought the Raiders here. Somehow it gets worse. During the game, Davis told SacB columnist Dan McGrath he didn't think those supporting the Raiders to Sacramento movement in the business community, including Fred Anderson himself, had the money or the means to get the deal over the line. Al Davis, the guy who straight up stole $10 million from the city of Irwindale, was bad-mouthing the man who invited him to Sacramento to come watch the Surge play. The nerve. If the humiliation of Davis and Sacramento to watch pro football wasn't bad enough, the Surge are absolutely manhandled by the Monarchs on this day. Their loss saw any faint hopes of making the playoffs finally dashed. It was probably for the best. They had no business being in the postseason. The final game of the campaign would be a return date with the Galaxy of Frankfurt. This is actually the first time all year the Surge have to leave North America, and the tale of the tape here is you have two sides going in exact opposite directions. Sacramento hadn't won since their victory over the Galaxy. Frankfurt, on the other hand, hadn't lost since that matchup. The German side also desperately needed to win to keep their playoff hopes alive. They were at 7-2 and tied with Barcelona, who were playing in London that same weekend. If Frankfurt wins, they are in the driver's seat to reach the playoffs. Walt Gray doing his best to promote the halftime show over there in Germany, but I'm not quite sure even he believes what he's saying about whoever this band happens to be.
This is a new group called Gax. They have an album out.
In a weird, confusing season, this would be the weirdest, most confusing result of all. The Surge go into halftime with the scores level at 7 and then proceed to play their best football of the entire year, going back to the capital of California, winners 24-13. Believe it or not, this was actually the first time an American team had won a game in Europe all year. It also eliminated Frankfurt from playoff contention. Record-wise, 3-7, not great. Honestly though, the Surge's season was a success by most other metrics. Attendance was strong despite bad weather, worse players, a lot of bonehead mistakes, and few wins for the home side. Sacramento was responsible for a bunch of league firsts. There was cause for optimism, and more importantly, everyone was going to run it back for year 2. The NFL confirmed its support for the WLAF for a second go-around, and Kay Stevenson, the head coach, was brought back as well. It looked like the rest of the coaches would return alongside of Stevenson, then something weird happens. Out of the blue, 2 months after the season ends, it is announced the man Lester Hayes called stupendous defensive coordinator Charlie Sumner would not be back with the Surge in '92. Yet no one can actually figure out if he was fired or if he resigned. That would not be the only weird thing to happen during the Surge's offseason. Remember that Arco Stadium that was one day going to host the Surge? Maybe even an NFL franchise if things broke right? Well, it has ground to a complete halt due to a lack of funds and rocky relationships. One of the Sacramento Sports Association co-owners, the body that owned the Kings, Arco Arena, and what was going to be Arco Park, Greg Lukenbill, was secretly recorded in a phone conversation with the other majority partner saying the following about Fred Anderson, who at this time was trying to invest in the SSA. The stadium wouldn't get built if I being Greg Lukenbill, was bought out because Fred doesn't know his asshole from a hole in the ground when it comes to building a stadium. Anderson doesn't know much about football either. He's not wrong about Anderson, the guy who wanted to name the Surge the 49ers only to find out that name was taken. Let me present to you Exhibit A. As the saga over Arco Park is playing out and eventually going nowhere, Anderson did want to find a new place for the Surge to play in '92. He saw Hornet Stadium as the answer. The home of Sac State football at this time is a dumpy little 6,000 seat venue with not a lot happening. Metal bleachers, porta potties, and that's really it. Anderson's plan was to install an additional 23,000 seats, all of which would be temporary bleachers, by the way, to boost its capacity. He'd also add on a modern press box and a few other things, and in exchange for all of this, Anderson would get the rights to parking at the school on game days. Those seats would play a outsized role in Anderson's next foreign football endeavor involving Sacramento, but that is a story for another day. The Surge had a new home and confirmation that the WLAF would be playing in 1992 despite some uncertainty around that. What they did not have were players. Most of that 1991 squad wouldn't be back in Sac for round 2, and given how the season played out, that was probably for the best. Toward the back end of 1991 and the early stages of 1992, things from a sporting perspective in Sacramento have gone absolutely off the rails. Magic Johnson is rebuffed in his attempt to buy the Kings. A group continues to work behind the scenes on the city's NFL expansion bid, and no work is being done on that team's proposed stadium over at the Arco Arena site, a project that threatens to bankrupt everyone involved. That leaves the Sacramento Surge in a bit of an odd spot as their second season in the World League of American Football approaches. Honestly, the situation was one that could have seen them featured on Sacramento's very own dating program, Scratch.
The Dateless and Desperate Club here on Scratch. Today, we're at El Camino High School.
About 15 or so years after that very segment is filmed, I'll be walking those same halls over at El Camino Fundamental High School, setting a new standard for dateless and desperate. I either raised the bar, lowered the bar. How does one quantify being more of a loser? None of this is important. The Surge spent most of their 1991 season as losers as well, but a new season and a new home brought renewed optimism that they could conquer the football world. Before that, though, NFL Commissioner Paul Tagliabue made a visit to the capital of California, where Surge owner Fred Anderson and some local dignitaries took him on a tour of all of the city's famed sites.
Sacramento, where California begins.
Oh, sorry, I read that incorrect. They actually took the NFL commissioner to go see a big-ass hole in the ground in the Thomas, and then they wined and dined him at the Hyatt Regency, which I guess was still kind of a big thing in 92. One of the themes of his visit was that the Surge and the World League of American Football were here to stay. We'll see how all of that plays out. Buffalo loses its second straight Super Bowl in January 1992, and a few days later, attention turns to the NFL's pet project. What is now known as the World League. American football has been dropped from the official name, meaning it's no longer a WLAFing matter. February 1992 comes and it is time for some roster building. Unlike the previous season, all the World League franchises headed into year 2 with some sort of a roster intact. Not everyone was back from the initial campaign, but everyone had some guys. There would also be a draft of free agents. More importantly though, a lot of guys from NFL rosters would be joining the league this time around. The first year only saw a handful of NFLers play on loan in the World League, and that certainly, it both hindered quality and made the league sort of useless from the NFL standpoint because it wanted this to serve as a developmental project. There was a real desire in the second go-around to embrace the newly christened World League as a full-fledged developmental system. Those players, though, would be assigned to clubs after the draft. The name of the game for Sacramento was find a starting quarterback. Play under center in 91 was just really bad, and it cost the team a chance at reaching the postseason. Sacramento's 3-7 record did mean it held the second overall pick in this World League draft. However, they held visions of securing that first overall pick, which was held by the Ohio Glory, who were previously known as the Raleigh-Durham Skyhawks. After a lot of on-again and off-again and on-again talks, a swap was finally agreed upon that saw the Surge trade the second pick in the draft as well as center Curtis Wilson for first overall. But there was a catch. League officials had held back some players who weren't under contract with an NFL team from the draft. We'll get into this a little bit later, but it did at least throw a wrench initially into the Surge front office's plans. That being said, Sacramento did find another reason to select first overall, targeting linebacker George Bethune, a solid hand who played 32 games for the Rams in his first 2 seasons in the big leagues. Surge general manager Mike Keller claimed he could make a Lawrence Taylor type impact. Fun fact, by the way, this would be the first ever trade in World League or World League of American Football history, another first for Sacramento. The 2-day draft comes to an end and the Surge pick a bunch of guys who you may have heard. Unlike 1991, which was just a bunch of nobodies, this class has some recognizable faces, although a lot of that has to do with what these players would become later on in life. In the second round, the Surge take running back Mike Pringle, who had been incredible at Cal State Fullerton. He'd later go on to break all kinds of CFL records. In the 7th round, the Surge took defensive lineman Bill Goldberg, who of course goes on to find fame in WCW years after this, albeit with much less hair. ESPN analyst Louis Reddick would be taken later on in the draft, as well as Jay Gruden, although he doesn't make the team out of training camp. Meanwhile, advanced season ticket sales are going better than they did in 1991. Ownership reports some 15,000 deposits had been made as Sacramento embarked on its second season over at Hornet Stadium. This number, though, well, let's just say not all of those deposits would turn into season ticket holders. It should also be mentioned Sacramento Surge marketing efforts are still a bit questionable. What the Surge did not have was a quarterback, at least not a good one, a one who would be capable of guiding the team to victories, but the front office knew exactly who they wanted. That would be David Archer. The passer was a solid starter for the Falcons and had been a backup for a few teams after injuring his shoulder. The Surge had an in. Their offensive coordinator, Jim Kreiner, actually coached Archer at Iowa State back in the early 1980s. This connection saw Archer want to come and play for his former college ball coach. Getting him to Sacramento was the larger challenge. Archer was not under contract with an NFL team, which meant he couldn't be distributed alongside the other NFL players to be loaned out to their World League counterparts. That, of course, meant he should have been made available in the free agent draft, but the World League doesn't expose him to that, knowing full and well he wanted to go play in Sacramento. It's a messy, confusing situation in which the league basically admits to colluding with the Surge to get Archer there. But hey, you gotta do what you gotta do. As far as actual NFL contracted players, more than 100 would find their way to the World League for the 92 season. Sacramento would land themselves a little-known defensive lineman from the Seattle Seahawks who would go on to have perhaps the greatest legacy of anyone on that team. At least from an NFL standpoint, Michael Sinclair wasn't much when he was assigned to play for the Surge, but he would go on to become a Pro Bowler and one of the Seahawks' best players in franchise history. Also suiting up for the Surge would be Mike Jones. Who?
I'm Mike Jones. Mike Jones. I'm Mike Jones. Mike Jones.
All right, let's break up that death loop here and there. This Mike Jones was on loan from the then Los Angeles Raiders. He would go on later in his career to be responsible for one of the Super Bowl's most famous plays ever, the tackle. It's safe to say the 1992 Surge roster was a vast improvement on that 1991 side, even if we didn't know at the time just what a lot of these players would go on to be later on in life when they realized their full potential. Hey, you gotta start somewhere, and that somewhere just happened to be Hornet Stadium on the campus of Sacramento State University. However, before they got to there, they actually had to spend training camp down in San Marcos, Texas. This was part of the whole World League initiative where they just wanted to have a pod of all the teams so they could scrimmage and they could practice and everyone was sort of there in the same place, saving costs. Meanwhile, back in Sacramento, the city was being treated to the California Hard Bodies Female Oil Wrestling at Paradise Beach. A first time for everything, no doubt. I love the headliners at this event at Paradise Beach are a former Miss Miller Lite and a former Miss English Leather.
And I like a man to wear English leather or wear nothing at all.
That, of course, is from the old aftershave, which I completely forgot was a thing. I know someone will defend English leather, but seriously, who would want to smell, as the Brits say, proper rank? I mean, who wants to smell like a used saddle? Sadly, some of these Surge players wouldn't be around for the California Hard Bodies all-female oil wrestling show should it ever return to the city. The front office made 5 trades in a single day in order to cut down the roster to the league's mandated maximum. Considering 0 trades were made in all of the league's first year, for 5 to happen in the span of a few hours on one day was quite the shock. There was finally some action on the field as the Surge opened the expanded Hornet Stadium with a preseason victory over the Montreal Machine. More than 14,000 people turned up for that exhibition game. Sadly, though, leading into this season, it feels like Surge fever is a little more subdued than it was in 1991. Much of that is due to a Days of Our Life-esque saga surrounding the Kings, who are being sold to a Southern California property developer, that being Jim Thomas, who may or may not want to move the Kings down to Anaheim in a new facility being built there. As they always say, history repeats itself, folks. Also, before the season kicks off, the Sacramento Bee runs what it calls a Surge Purge contest, where they ask readers to come up with a new name, a new logo, a new brand identity for the team, and there were two that really stuck out to me. First were the Sacramento Redskins, which was based on tomatoes, and I thought that was kind of clever given the city's history with tomatoes and tomato truck accidents. The second was this Sacramento Barbs submission, which looks suspiciously similar to a tattoo a certain Surge player would later become famous for. They're kind of different, not by a whole lot though. It doesn't matter. It's finally time to start the 1992 campaign. Some real football is coming, and the Surge are kicking off their season at home at their newly renovated Hornet Stadium with a showdown against the Birmingham Fire. The weather was far nicer than the previous season's opener. The quarterback play was also vastly improved, yet attendance wasn't significantly higher for this game than the 1991 debut over at Hughes Stadium. Sacramento was led by David Archer, who went 18 for 32 and 272 yards. A breath of fresh air compared to the likes of Mike Elkins and Ben Bennett. The real story here, though, was the Surge's defense. They were dominant, and Birmingham just could not do anything against them. Surge win the first one. A week later, and Sacramento held another opponent to 6 points, this time on the road against the Ohio Glory. Next was a matchup against the Montreal Machine, and the defense did its part here again, holding the Canadian side to 7 points. Offensively, it wasn't so great. The Surge required a late touchdown to break a 7-7 deadlock, and honestly, the offense just not quite firing in all cylinders. That changed the following week when Sacramento set all kinds of offensive records in an overtime loss to the San Antonio Riders. That continued the team's trend of losing in added time, and things would not get better. They headed to Birmingham for a rematch against the Fire. Their 2 fourth-quarter turnovers cost them a chance at winning the game. We're at the midway point of the 1992 season, and things aren't looking great for the Surge. They sit 3-2, but that finds them bottom of the North American West Division standings. No, it's not a bleak situation. The teams above them, the Riders and Fire, were each 3-1. However, this was the complete opposite of 91, when all three teams were bad and struggled to get to 500. Off the field, you get a lingering sense that the situation is not going great or even as expected, although those running the franchise desperately try to spin it positively. Despite playing in the much bigger Hornet Stadium, attendance is only marginally improved year over year. The 15,000 season ticket deposits made for the Surge only led to about 13,000 season ticket purchases, putting the numbers in line with basically what they had in 91. Also, everybody in town knew it was super easy to find comped Surge tickets. They were handing them out like candy. Seriously, all you needed to do was show up to a Bel Air and there was like a 45% chance you'd land some Surge tickets. The Surge's surge to the postseason began with the side's 2 most difficult road trips back to back, a trip to London followed by a visit to Montreal. It wasn't easy and players didn't love it, but the Surge emerged from their 18-day, 12,000-mile road trip with a pair of victories. Sacramento was now sitting on top of the North American West Division standings, and business was picking up. This was just the beginning of the Surge's run. The return home was extraordinarily sweet as the team obliterated the Frankfurt Galaxy 51-7. The exploits of the Surge and this impressive 3-game winning streak was overshadowed quite a bit by Surge owner Fred Anderson's dalliances with NFL expansion, that being tied to the futile attempt to build that Arco Park Stadium. Anderson was struggling with that, but the Surge had no issues dispatching the Ohio Glory in their final home game of the season, and that sets up a last week showdown with the San Antonio Riders, a winner-take-all affair, sort of. With both teams sitting at 7-2, the victor would be assured the division crown and a home playoff date. The loser would need to wait until the following day to find their fate, which was tied to the result of the Birmingham Fire Ohio Glory contest, although that seemed like it would be a foregone conclusion. The Fire were 6-2-1 and taking on that glory side who was 1-8 on the year. A win for the Fire mean they would advance to the playoffs as the World League's wild card, condemning the loser of the Surge Riders game to a postseason at home. What took place on this day was one of the best games in World League history, a back and forth contest where both teams were really giving their all. Despite trailing at halftime, the Surge stormed back in the second stanza, scoring 13 unanswered points with a smooth touchdown grab by downtown Eddie Brown, sealing the win and the division for Sacramento. When you look at the regular season in 1992 for the Surge, it is absolutely night and day when compared to that first go-round, which was hard on the eyes. That inaugural campaign was a bunch of guys on their way out of football, really. Like, not many of them go on to the NFL, and most of them end up not playing football professionally again. The Surge 92 roster had a great pedigree of either guys who had experience in the NFL or who would go on to at least have a cup of coffee professionally. David Archer is undoubtedly the most interesting story here just because of who he was and what he wanted. By this stage in his career, he's entering his 30s. He just wanted an opportunity to play football, to start for a team, and he didn't really care who it was. Archer admitted during the season he didn't want to hold a clipboard anymore, and no one in the NFL was giving him the opportunity to play. Archer took that opportunity with both hands. When you look at his exploits in 92 with the Surge and a year later with the Sacramento Gold Miners in 1993, it is without question to say he was better than several NFL quarterbacks on rosters at that time. Of course, they had some draft cachet behind them. Jim Everett was a complete disaster despite being roughly the same age as Archer. Jack Trudeau would start 5 games for the Colts in 92 and 93. I cannot explain why. I cannot give you a good reason why, apart from the fact that the Colts had spent a second-round draft pick on him at once.
Watch this. Pierre Trudeau could have thrown it better.
When you look at Archer's body of work, he would have been an upgrade on Jack Trudeau. Elsewhere on the Surge offense, Mike Pringle goes on to have a legendary career in the CFL. Downtown Eddie Brown was another good player in Canada. He has perhaps the most famous catch in Grey Cup history. Tight end Paul Green starts for a few seasons for the Seahawks. The real story of the Sacramento Surge in 1992 was the defensive line, which was absolutely dominant. The name that gets the most attention here, of course, is going to be Bill Goldberg because of what he goes on to do later on in life. Everyone just gravitates towards him. And let's be real, Goldberg was not a world beater, but he did his job on the interior of the defensive line. And you look at his physical profile, you look at his athleticism, and it's easy to see why he would go on to hang with the Atlanta Falcons for a few seasons after his stint in Sacramento. Helping Goldberg, though, was having 2 of the best edge rushers in all of the World League lining up outside of him. Michael Sinclair was a stud, posting 10 sacks on the year and being a disruptive handful. He was clearly destined for bigger and better things down the road, even if he wouldn't quite realize it after his time in the World League. Meanwhile, the Surge's first pick in that 1992 free agent draft, George Bethune, had himself a really good year as well, totaling 7 sacks after he wraps up with Sacramento. He's in a few training camps with NFL franchises. Bethune's problem is that he was that weird tweener you saw quite a bit in the 90s. He wasn't quite fast enough to be that outside linebacker. He wasn't quite big enough to be your edge defensive end, and he really gets lost in the shuffle. These players, though, as good as they were in the regular season, could not rest just yet. The Sacramento Surge had a home date with the Barcelona Dragons. Hornet Stadium would play host to Sacramento's first ever World League playoff game, and it was an exciting time for the town and team. The Sacramento Surge entered the 1992 World League playoffs winners of 5 straight and full of confidence. Their opponents, on the other hand, were trending in the exact opposite direction. The Barcelona Dragons, in their beautiful uniforms and logo, had lost 4 straight contests, scoring a total of 10 points in their last 3 matchups. That doesn't even tell the entire story of the Dragons season. They opened the year 5-1, but all of those games were played in Europe. Their final 4 fixtures saw them take, well, quite the road trip. They went from Birmingham, Alabama, back to Barcelona, over to New York, and then Orlando, Florida in consecutive weeks. From one sunny location to the other, the Dragons had to go from Orlando to Sacramento for their first round playoff matchup against the Surge. The last time these two teams met, it was also in Sacramento in a very odd 29-20 overtime victory for the Dragons. That was 1991 in Hughes Stadium. In 92, the game would be taking place at Hornet Stadium and the stakes would be much higher. On the line was a berth to World Bowl 92. The Surge entered this contest as 2 touchdown favorites, heading into a game that had a lot of excitement around town. You could say the situation was hot, but not as hot as the temperatures on May 31st, 1992 down at Hornet Stadium. It was 85 degrees at kickoff, which was happening at noon, and by the time the second half began, the temperatures are well into the 90s. All of the players, all of the coaches, everyone looks pretty miserable.
That's the way they dress in the desert, and they'll do it here in Sacramento this afternoon.
The TV broadcast simply labeled the conditions as scorching. Not that you could watch this game on live TV in Sacramento. KOVR, the ABC affiliate which had the rights to the game, opted to show it on tape delay 3 hours later because they didn't want to disturb the Children's Miracle Network telethon. The Heat did not bother Jim Valvano on the sideline, looking as dapper as ever in his suit and tie. He's actually surprisingly good in his role of sideline reporter. Look, he's doing his shtick for sure.
I also talked to David Archer and say, hey, what's going on?
But when you go beyond that, you can tell he's doing the work. He knows the game. He knows the people involved. Like I said, it's really good work from Valvano here.
He said the Barcelona defense is so disciplined in their drops and their spacing is so good that he's been unable to find seams in that defense.
Valvano was just one of the 23,640 people in attendance at Hornet Stadium on this day. The playoff bout saw the Surge set their all-time home attendance record. One of the most interesting things, and I think coolest things about this game between the Surge and the Dragons, is the atmosphere. It does not feel like some American football game. It has that atmosphere you would expect to find at an FA Cup final. It's warm, it's sunny, everyone's super happy to be there. There were balloons. To that extent, anyone who was there watching the Surge take on the Dragons at Hornet Stadium has fond memories of being there because it was such a fun experience. It was a football game where a party broke out in the heat. Like most good parties, no one bothers showing up at the start. Both teams are really uneven during the first quarter. Surge quarterback David Archer nearly fumbles on the first possession of the game. Dragons kicker Eddie Garcia then shanks a field goal wide left. The party picks up in the second quarter when Surge safety Louis Reddick, of now ESPN fame, snags a pick six to open the scoring, giving the Sacramento Surge a 7-0 lead. Later on in that same quarter, he lays the lumber on Dragons running back Joe Mickles. As the quarter progresses, the Dragons go on a very long, meandering 16-play scoring drive that ends in a field goal, and there you have it. It's 7-3 at the break. The teams return to the Hornet Stadium heater for the second half, and it looks like the Surge are going to pull away from the Dragons early on. A few minutes into the half, downtown Eddie Brown scores on an 86-yard punt return for Sacramento to take a 14-3 lead. Then, immediately afterwards, out of nowhere, the game gets flipped upside down. The Dragons get the ball and score on a 90-yard touchdown pass. Archer then throws an interception, and Barcelona goes on to take the lead through a touchdown pass from Scott Ernie a few plays later. It's 15-14 midway through the third quarter, and the party has officially been pooped. It looks like it's about to be lights out for the Sacramento Surge as Dragons kicker Eddie Garcia lines up for a field goal in the fourth quarter that would give the visitors a 4-point lead. The Surge offense had done nothing all game long. They were super ineffective. It was later reported that Archer had a stomach bug during this game, which caused him to throw quite a few errant passes. The Dragons taking a 4-point lead probably seals the game for them. Thankfully, the kick goes wide right, and the tables turn once again. The Surge managed to work their way into field goal range, where kicker Kerry Blanchard sneaks one in for the home team to go up by 2 points with about 4 minutes left in the contest. It was a pretty nervy finish, but Sacramento does hold on, and they earn a berth to World Bowl 92. The showpiece of it is taking place at Olympic Stadium in Montreal, which is a pretty awesome place. Montreal, by the way, had done pretty good attendance numbers for their hometown team, the Machine. It trailed off in 92 because the Machine were not very good, but the hope was a solid crowd would show up for the World Bowl. Awaiting the Surge would be the Orlando Thunder led by Detroit Lions loanee Scott Mitchell. They also finished the World League regular season 8-2 and absolutely destroyed the Birmingham Fire in their semifinal 45-7. Sadly, the buildup for the American Football World Championship gets lost in the shuffle back home in Sacramento as the team is away in Montreal preparing for the big game. Surge owner Fred Anderson thought it was the perfect time to announce he had bought the Arco Park Stadium site and was making a pitch for the Giants. It was such terrible timing, and it's something that could have easily been done a few days later, a week later after the World Bowl had taken place. Because make no mistake, this news about Arco Park trying to get built with the Giants playing there is front page news. And it relegates the Surge to far lesser coverage than it probably would have received without all of this talk about the Giants coming to Sacramento. I suppose that was still better than some of the other news out there, namely officials from the World League continuing to talk about how they were coming back for the 93 season and continuing to say the league wasn't in danger. They were repeating the line so much you couldn't help but think something was up, something was happening behind the scenes. That though is a concern for down the road. There was still one more game left in the 92 season, and it just happened to be for all the marbles for supremacy of the American football playing world. Nearly 44,000 people turned out in Montreal, some Surge and Thunder fans, but mostly just people from the Canadian city curious as to what was happening here. For the Surge, things did not get off to the best of starts. A comically late hit from Louis Reddick on a 3rd and long keeps a Thunder drive alive. Naturally, they then go on to score the game's opening touchdown and take a 7-0 lead. Surge defensive coordinator Jim Haslett not particularly impressed by what he saw. The Surge respond with a field goal in the 2nd quarter. The Surge's hero from the previous week, Eddie Brown, is still perhaps a little too amped up from returning that punt for a touchdown, the first in his entire career, because here against the Thunder, he fumbles in the first half while returning a punt, and that sets up Orlando with good field position. They do not waste any time capitalizing on the mistake. Another Mitchell touchdown pass sees Orlando go up 14-3. Surge quarterback David Archer, perhaps a little too desperate to try to make something happen, then throws a pick. Inside 2 minutes remaining in the half, the Thunder get a field goal to extend their lead to 14 points. Eddie Brown then makes amends for his previous mistake by getting the Surge into field goal range with 1 second left in the half. Kerry Blanchard's kick is good, and Sacramento enters halftime down by 11. Any positive momentum that may have given Sacramento was quickly undone when Archer fumbles in the red zone, as it looks like the Surge were going to score. The Surge's defense gets a stop, but the offense gives the ball right back to Orlando on their next drive. This time, an ill-fated end-around wide receiver pass from Brown is happily collected by the Thunder defense. The play call itself, though, gives you an idea of just how out of sync Sacramento's offense is and how out of ideas everyone just seems to be at this point. They didn't score a touchdown against Barcelona. They haven't scored a touchdown in 3 quarters against Orlando. Either the Surge can't move the ball because Archer is wildly inaccurate with his passes, or the offense is turning the ball over needlessly. Going into the 4th quarter, Sacramento seemed doomed. It was hard to envision them scoring the 11 points needed to even tie this contest up, and it almost got worse. Early on in the 4th quarter, it looked like wide receiver Mark Stock had fumbled the ball, but he narrowly got his knee to the ground. It was the break the Surge needed. A few plays later, David Archer breaks his spell of not great play by hurling a touchdown pass to tight end Paul Green. You get the sense Sacramento is starting to believe now, and then on the 2-point conversion, you get a hell of a pitch and catch between Archer and Stock that sees Orlando's lead cut to 3. The momentum shift is real and quickly realized with Sacramento on defense. Reddick coming through on an A-gap blitz knocks the ball out of Mitchell's hands inside Thunder territory. It was a gift that would be squandered, however. The Surge offense goes 3 and out, and then Blanchard shanks a game-tying field goal. I'm not exactly sure what happened here, but it does seem like something happened because Archer, who in addition to being the Surge's starting quarterback, was also the team's placeholder on field goals, comes off the field very angry and seemingly angry with himself. There's still 9 minutes left though. All is not lost. All the Surge need to do is get a stop and they'll have a chance to either tie or win the World Bowl. And boy, oh boy, Sacramento did not have to wait long for another opportunity. Linebacker Mike Jones intercepts Mitchell and gives the team the ball inside Orlando's 40. There would be no 3 and out for the Surge this time around. A fantastic catch and run from running back Mike Pringle gives Sacramento a 1st and goal. After a pair of runs that go absolutely nowhere, Archer lobs the ball to downtown Eddie Brown, and Sacramento takes its first lead of the ball game. There's still time to play though. The Thunder get the ball back. Then Mitchell proceeds to almost fumble it away immediately. In fact, I'm convinced this was a fumble. I'm not sure why the referees blew this play dead. Forward progress wasn't stopped. It's just a bad call.
No, he's taking some shots. That looked like a fumble.
It was something that had clearly rattled Mitchell though, because on the next play, he almost throws an interception. As bad as the Surge's offense was in the first half, Orlando's offense in the second half has been worse. They are extremely disjointed. Mitchell is 5 for 16 in the second half at this point in the game. Their last 3 plays are interception, a fumble that wasn't called, but probably a fumble, and almost interception. So what does the Thunder offense manage to conjure up next? Reddick on another blitz strips Mitchell on a really heads-up play to locate the ball. Orlando does recover the fumble, but we do need to take some time to appreciate this play. Reddick does not take his eyes off the ball. He knows exactly what he's looking for. He knows exactly what he is doing. It's a cerebral defensive play. It's one he probably doesn't have the physical talent to make in the NFL, but you do get an idea of what kind of mind he does have for the sport in this play. The ESPN, or the future ESPN analyst, by the way, super pumped with himself, and rightly so. Terrible first half penalty in the World Bowl aside, Reddick is huge for Sacramento in the entire playoffs. And for most of the regular season too, he doesn't miss tackles. He can put a hit on someone. Like, he lays the lumber down when he needs to. He makes plays. He generates turnovers. Reddick is a really good player for the Sacramento Surge, and he's a good player at least at this level. You can kind of see he's not the fastest. He's not the strongest. That's why he didn't make a career for himself in the NFL. But here, he is arguably the Surge's best player. Looking to wind down the clock, Sacramento commits multiple holding penalties on the next drive. The Surge punt, giving Orlando the opportunity to score a game-winning touchdown. Instead, though, it's more the same for the Thunder on offense. Until Mitchell finally completes a pass on 3rd down. It is fumbled, the Thunder recover, but you could just see how disoriented the entire offense is, and one play later, that would be on full display. Michael Sinclair breezes past the Orlando offensive line for a strip sack on Mitchell. He recovers the ball himself too, and Sacramento is in the driver's seat as the 2-minute warning nears. I don't know if I have ever seen 8 straight offensive plays as bad as what Orlando churned out in the World Bowl 92. It is a ruinous, disastrous sequence of offensive plays, the stuff of nightmares. 3 fumbles, a 4th that wasn't called, 2 near interceptions, incomplete passes. The team's lone positive play here also included a fumble that they just happened to recover. Sacramento almost scores again, but a holding penalty would negate Pringle's touchdown scamper. Not that the Surge minded in the slightest, because it meant they could run out the clock, and there you have it. Sacramento Surge 21, Orlando Thunder 17. It meant those Surge players and coaching staff could lift up the 41-pound crystal globe.
We pronounce you the champions of the world, the Sacramento Surge. Congratulations. Be careful, lift that up.
That's 41 pounds worth of crystal.
After the victory, the Surge returned home. Some fans greeted them at the airport. There was an event at what is today known as Cesar Chavez Plaza, with Sacramento Mayor-elect Joe Cerna telling the crowd, Sacramento may not be world class, but we are world champs. A historic line for a historic victory. The good times for the Sacramento Surge would roll on for a little bit longer in the aftermath of the win. Why not meet the Surge cheerleaders at your neighborhood Bel Air and buy some chicken breasts while you're at it? Things eventually do fizzle out. A lot of Surge players find themselves in NFL training camps. Surge head coach Case Stevenson announced he would return for the 1993 season. The NFL, though, was keeping mum on any 93 season plans. That's because the league's priority was an ongoing lawsuit with players over free agency. This had become Paul Tagliabue's priority. Everything goes quiet on the World League front. The Surge are still making plans as if there's going to be a 93 season, because the NFL had spent a lot lot of 92 talking about how we're coming back for the year. Then the NFL loses its court case against players. All the owners assume that's going to mean higher salaries. Even then, nothing is communicated to the World League owners for over a week about what's the status of the league for 93. Then on September 17th, the NFL pulls the plug. No warning, no talk about exploring what the league's future may hold. It's just done. And everyone is left sort of stunned and confused by this news. Anderson was particularly stung by the announcement, which came about a month after he pulled out of buying the Arco Park site and luring the Giants to town. They were off to Tampa, or so it seemed. As for the Surge, that's it. They went from champions to death in 4 months' time. The World League returns in 95, but with no American teams and really no world element. It's Europe, and that's why it would become NFL Europe. Anderson spends a few months bickering with the NFL over compensation for them pulling the plug on the World League, but the Surge, they quickly fade from public memory.
The Sacramento Surge was probably more fun than anything I've done. And it was an awful downer to see it terminated by the NFL.
It would not be the end for professional football in Sacramento, despite having sworn off a professional football team, any sort of professional sports team. Anderson had a problem. He was locked into leasing those bleachers and equipment at Hornet Stadium for at least another year, and that lease was costing him an estimated $1,000 a day. He kind of needed something to be playing there. Meanwhile, our friendly neighbors to the north, well, they had themselves a crazy idea too. The Surge may have been gone, but a new team and a new league would take their place in 1993. That, though, is a story for another occasion. Thank you for watching this video. If you'd like to know more about just all things Sacramento sports related, well, check out the playlist in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. A lot of history can be found up there. Until next time, I am Cheyenne Hollis. This is The Touchback, and as always, hashtag take it out to 25.